Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 352. I'm delighted to welcome back onto the podcast. It's been far too long. Liam Connor, how are we doing?
Yeah, really good, mate. Thanks for having me back. I'm excited to speak about a few bits again and see what's changed.
It's probably been an embarrassing amount of time, to be fair. So I apologise that you've not been back on beforehand. Give people a little bit of background on yourself to start with, Liam.
Yeah, mate. So, obviously, as I probably said in the previous one, background, sports rehab and S&C primarily as a like discipline background. Spent first part of my career in professional football. Then had the fortune to jump over to like the Olympic Sports Institute. Also did some consultancy with Val Performance. And then most recently, probably biggest change has been I've dived back into the football world, but on the women's side of the game now. So heading up the department, the head of performance team at Newcastle United Women's, currently in the WSL2. Hopefully looking to push up this year and get into the WSL next season. So yeah, mate, that's probably the quick and short of it. But yeah, experience across a range of different sports, and then now back in football.
Awesome, mate. Yeah, I want to jump into that just in terms of your experiences across sports. Well, just to start with, a little bit of reflection from being in football, being away from football, going back to football. How's that been for you? What's the initial sort of um, what jumps to mind in terms of reflections on being away from it for a little bit and then coming back?
Yeah, I think like early reflections is I think a lot has started to change. Um, like if I look at when I left, I think there was still very much that football is football mentality. Um, Things have always been done this way, not necessarily as much progress and innovation. But I think you're really starting to see clubs take practitioners out of different environments and bring them in for being experts in a specific area and adopt that. And people being more open and receptive into doing things a bit differently and starting to try and move the needle in different ways. I think also like coming back into the women's game, I definitely have seen things trying to be done differently there because I think you've got more of a blank canvas. It's a little bit younger. You got less entrenched. We've always done it this way, so it's definitely seems more receptive to novel ideas. And again, through some of the people in the FA and in the league support who have maybe institute backgrounds or have been around different backgrounds, they're still trying to be quite novel in some of the mandated requirements so that we're moving away from what it's always been. But I still think there's still some embedded challenges with players' beliefs, player understanding of what should be versus what is, that make it a battle, but an exciting one to have, I suppose.
Yeah, brilliant. It's something that's we've talked about recently in terms of the like you mentioned there about bringing experts in from possibly different sports, different fields. Well, then I suppose the conversation we've had recently is the real understanding of football
Yeah,
and the understanding of the technical and tactical side, the language and things like that as well. So I know you've had experience previously, but do you what's been your experience between maybe those two extremes? Do you see that is necessarily something that people struggle with? Or do you think it's quite easy that once you're in the environment that you can sort of amend to it?
yeah, it's really interesting, and I've seen it firsthand. We've done a hell of a lot of recruitment recently, and you can tell people who have been around a game, and you can tell people who haven't. I think for me, like we offer, and the way I would see it is, it's a little bit role dependent. So I always talk about the closer the role responsibilities to the pitch and interacting either with the players directly on pitch or with the head coach in and around planning and periodization of training, the more important a deeper understanding of the game is and the better ability to talk about language. So, like an example, recently, me and a head coach had a debate about what a rondo is. So, like, because I've been around the game, I've got quite heavy skin in that, whereas like other people probably wouldn't be able to have that conversation. But like as you go further away to things such as potentially nutrition, even like some of our physios in terms of like our head physio is from a rugby background and he's seen every injury under the sun, so he's really skillful in that set. It's a different need and a different demand. I think if you get the right people in place, people pick up the terminology and the language and the cadence and the understanding. But having that diversity of thought is also really powerful. So we've been really deliberate in the team we're trying to build at Newcastle United Women around having a real good balance of football, women's football specifically, people from the men's game and the academy game, and then as well as going probably more external and trying to bring people in from different sports with different backgrounds to challenge our thought processes and bring kind of a nuance of ideas. So I think it's definitely certain roles that you go, yeah, I really do want someone who gets the game. Or has coached or can coach or has played. But then there's other roles where I'm like, there's not a need. And actually there's probably more of a hindrance if you try and understand the game in that role because you're better off staying removed than just truly acting from the principles of nutrition or physiology or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I love that. I think that knits it together really nicely because I think I don't know if naivety is the right word, but the fact of like asking questions on why we do something can be really powerful, can't it? Sometimes that pulls away from the trap of it's just because we've always done it. If you stand
Yeah.
and I'm trying to think of the people that have brought this up in podcasts. I can't because I think there's quite a few that have said the same thing that just challenging and asking why we're doing something. If you come up with an answer that sort of justifies it, cool. If you don't, maybe things should change, and how you change that is then a different discussion. But I think that kind of relates into what you're talking about there, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And like, I went into badminton, right, and had never really played the sport, didn't have an understanding of the sport, and spent 3.5 years there with that, and learned the language. Now understand the game to a completely different level. But like, one of the jokes I used to have with the coaches there, because as an entrenched sport, they always used to talk about being different to every other sport. And I used to have a joke of like, at the end of the day, any sport you deal with, you're dealing with people, and people are the same. You're dealing with physiology in some sense, whether it's slightly shorter or slightly longer in terms of exposure, and you're dealing with a set of white lines or a set of restrictions, and all they're doing is changing shape and dimension. Like, and I know that sounds really reductionist, and it is a bit tongue in cheek, but like, it's not drastically that different no matter what sport you do in terms of the principles of what we're trying to achieve. And in principle, you're working with people to create adaptations in some sense. And when you apply it logically like that, you can transition into any sport if you can apply those principles correctly, in my opinion.
No, I think it's a great point. It's interesting now as well because we were going to talk about the performance team that you're building and the diversity that you've spoken about already. I think is a really fascinating point because of the fact that we get these challenges, and I'm guessing a lot of really cool discussions that are going on between practitioners as well. How do you go about creating an environment where it can? And we just spoke about this before we started recording, but having like debates and challenging people without it starting turning into like finger pointing and people taking it the wrong way.
Yeah, I think it's something that I live by and have always tried to have within my practice and cultures that I've worked in. I think the simplest way I can describe it is as a leader, you have to live the example. So I am open to any of my practitioners challenging something that I say, something that I do, and will respond positively to that no matter what it is. And like I'm happy to engage in a healthy debate. I think the flip as well is like just being very transparent. So like I came in to a partially established team, and I was just very upfront in at the start in that that's the way I work. I'll ask a lot of questions. I'll always challenge a thought process, not because I think you're wrong, but because challenging a question is good, even if we end up at the same answer. And I think once you kind of just put those expectations out there and you live and breathe it, it creates a bit of a snowball effect where that's really positive. And again, just being honest, like I'm more than happy to say when I'm asking a question just to challenge and almost putting it on the table. Like I'm going to engage with you right now because I think there's an opportunity here, rather than I'm just engaging with you because I think you're wrong.
Mm.
Um, and then just creating opportunities as a department to get together and have those open conversations, encouraging people to have a voice, making sure that you allow the quieter people in a room to have a voice, which is something I've had to learn as a leader. Like I'm quite natural in a debate. I'm quite vocal. So being able to make sure you create space and room for people who aren't necessarily as forward as that to have that opportunity. And me and the head coach have reflected on this, and like we talk about, we've got some people in our staffing group who are reflectors, and me and her are probably a little bit more in the moment thinkers. So sometimes we'll also prime meetings and go, we're going to come and talk about this, have time to think and bring your ideas so that we're not catching people off guard. Um, but again, I just think like the biggest thing for me is about people, employ the right people. So we operate a very, I'd say, aggressive recruitment process. It's hard, it's tough, it's challenging. Even the recruitment process I went through was the same. And what that means is that you know you've got someone who's not going to back away from questions and can respond to them and can see it as a positive, rather than maybe necessarily someone who does take that negatively and gets defensive. So if you get your recruitment process right, you know you're going to have the sort of right people and the right mentalities in the room.
Yeah, 100%. I think that it's really fascinating just on that recruitment process because I'm sure people take different ways of going about it. But like we've already mentioned, we've talked about sort of diversity of backgrounds and experiences, but then the more personable skills are the interesting side, aren't they? Like you've mentioned, people that can sort of speak and engage with people, challenge people. But what is there any others sort of traits and attributes that you're looking at that maybe are common across your staff and that you look for, or even with that, are you looking for some diversity as well?
Yeah, so like the commonalities would be a growth mindset, someone who wants to improve themselves, wants to improve a team, is looking for opportunities. So like they would probably be the commonalities. Outside of that, like we got a really diverse group of people. So we personality profile all of our staff when they come in as well. And like we've got a real spectrum of people on that. We've got prudent thinkers, we've got optimistic thinkers, we've got people who are as red as you can be, people who are as green as you can be. Like we're really like mixed in that front, but everyone within that still probably has a form of growth mindset, still has a desire to improve either our performance or their own performance. And I think we try and get that out of the interview process that we do. I would definitely say like our interview process shifts slightly more heavily to the soft skills. I think like we box competence off and we obviously make sure we have people who have the skill set needed. But after that, it becomes around, okay, how do you interact with different people? So throughout an interview process, they'll probably meet 4 or 5 different members of staff, more in those informal settings and conversations. We tend to do like a mock practical where we have a member of staff act as an athlete to again get a different sense check on that. And that's the bit for me where I think you see the real truth of, okay, like you could be really good technically, have all the right answers, but if you can't engage either with the staffing group that need to get on board with it or the players, then you're not as efficient as you could be. So I think exhibiting that stuff out of an interview process is where we focus our priority. But yeah, we've got a real mix of staff, and again, like probably deliberately, but also just naturally. Like once you do all of that, you get the right candidate, and then you end up with the mix of people that you end up with.
Do you feel like you surround yourself with people like that because that benefits you as well? You know, from
Yeah,
different backgrounds, different experiences, because you can suddenly start pulling from these different experiences of practitioners.
yeah, 100%. I think I have probably an unconscious or maybe even slightly conscious bias because I've come from that mixed background, and there's been times where I've been frustrated because I haven't got a job because I wasn't pure from football or wasn't pure from that background. Like I think I have a little bit of a soft spot for diversity of thought and diversity of ideas because I've seen it benefit my own practice and in other environments I've been in. And then yeah, absolutely. Like the last thing I'd want to do is have a team of people that either all think the same way, all come from the same background, and we end up in just a narrow set of thinking. Um, because that's a risk, and I've seen it again in other sports where maybe the pool of coaches isn't as broad or the pool of staff in support isn't as broad, and you end up with this kind of culture of we've always done it this way, but not because that's the right way. It's just because no one really has ever known any different or challenged that or been able to rationalize why we should do it differently. So I think the more opportunity you have to bring a real diversity of thought together with a good then system and an ecosystem of healthy challenge, healthy debate, we're only trying to get to the right answer, you'll only ever then improve the sport and improve the program you're looking to drive.
Yeah, definitely. I want to bounce back to one of the points you just made before about the maybe quieter staff members, the ones that are maybe not going to be as outspoken in debates, possibly, but you know that they've got some good stuff to bring to the table as well. You talked about getting them involved in team meetings and the environment. Is there anything practical, any sort of tips that you could give listeners in terms of getting the most out of practitioners like that?
Yeah, I think understanding who you've got in a room and who you're working with. So I think again I alluded to some people are reflective, some people think more in the moment. So if you know you've got reflective thinkers who, if I turned to you right now and said we're going to have a conversation about this, wouldn't be able to engage because they want 24 hours to go away and compose their thoughts and come back to you with a well rationalized argument or conversation. So if you know you've got people like that, I would give them that time. So we're going to meet on Wednesday. This is going to be the agenda. These are going to be the topic points. Come prepared. Come with your thoughts. Um, Again, like whoever's agenda or whoever's controlling that meeting, using the room and controlling the room. So, okay, I've got X person. What do you think? Oh, you've not said much yet. I know you've got stuff on this because we've spoken about it privately. Like I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts and creating that opportunity. And then like other things, just like soft nudges. So, there's been members of staff previously who I've had really good private conversations with, and then maybe haven't contributed in group settings. And I've just, before I've gone into a meeting, gone like, I know you've got a lot to add in this. We've had the conversations. I want to hear from you.
Hmm.
And almost like giving them that confidence and that permission to go, like, let's go and engage. Um, and then the other bit would just be probably then controlling your room size and your conversation size. So, like teams of 4 and 5 talking around a topic is quite comfortable. Once you get into slightly bigger pictures, it becomes slightly harder to get everybody to voice an opinion, and people feel maybe a little bit more threatened. So we try and keep like our working groups in and around that kind of magic 4 or 5 number, which then allows us to have tighter conversations, more frank and open conversations. You don't necessarily need to have a chair of a meeting. You can kind of just let it flow naturally. Whereas once you go into kind of 8, 9, up to 10, you kind of then need a more controlled flow of that meeting.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think those group sizes are perfect, aren't they? It's obviously something we do with the events. We try and break out into groups like that because it's enough people for our perspective anyway that aren't practitioners from the same club or same team or whatever. It's enough to meet new people, but
Yeah.
not too many to meet too many people at the same time. So yeah, we've always stuck to that. But it's interesting that sort of relates over to your department as well. Um, yeah, I think in terms of the groups, I think that's really interesting. And just how you structure the meetings, the room size, and everything that you discussed there. I think it's really important, isn't it? Because these are things that can easily be looked over. And suddenly, this is where we talked about create environments all the time and where we can have these discussions. And this is actually the practical examples of what you need to be taken into account, not being in a massive room with a load of people and creating these opportunities. And I think the other thing that stood out from what you were saying now, as you've alluded to it a few times, is the conversations you've had away from the group. And that's another interesting one, isn't it? Because that sort of preloads what you're going to be talking about with the group and you know where people can contribute.
Yeah, 100%. Like we have a lot of corridor conversations, bus conversations, like watching a game conversations, and it's like you in those moments you start to get an idea of what people are thinking, what people can contribute, and then you just get building the confidence for them to either one go away and bring that as something formal. So, oh, like that's a really good idea. Why don't you put that together as a presentation and present it back to the group? Because then it gives them the confidence to do that. Or actually, yeah, when we go into our next meeting, bring that up as an idea. Um, and again, the big thing I would try and do that is give ownership. So like don't take an idea and run with it. Let them run with it. Give them empower people to run with their own ideas. Oh yeah, like go and speak to their coach about that because I think that's a really good idea. Like I think you should bring that up with them rather than oh I'll bring it up with them. Like oh no go like empower the staff to have the ideas and create that culture. Um, Again, that works in different environments. Our head coach is really open and receptive to that. Other environments probably slightly different, and you have to work within kind of what you've got. But yeah, that's the thing for me is no conversation should almost be left or just be parked. It should be like, how can we use that to build momentum on something or build confidence moving forward?
What have you done? What sort of approach have you taken in terms of progressing into this like leadership role now? Like, is it something that you've focused in on and purposely upskilled on, or is it something that you've naturally taken to and sort of learn as you go?
Yeah, no, I'd say I've been really deliberate. I probably realized quite early on in my career that I preferred the leadership elements of the role and what I was doing than necessarily the practitioner side. So I enjoyed strategy and building systems and processes more than I did coaching. Um, the biggest value for me came from the institute. So like I'd had mentors prior to that, but then coming into the institute, they were able to pretty much like really drive my leadership development. So I did probably 3 or 4 different sort of leadership development courses in the time I was there. And then as well as once you kind of take on certain roles, you then get a leadership development coach. And they've like been massive in helping me understand myself, helping me understand how I interact with other people. And a lot of the stuff I'll probably say and talk about have been learned through that. Like they don't come naturally. It's very deliberate. It's very thoughtful in terms of how you construct a meeting, how you engage with different practitioners, how you engage with different staff to get the most out of people. Um, and it's almost a skill, like it's almost a discipline in itself, in my opinion. Like you don't lead just because you're good at being an S&C coach. And I always talk about like the practitioners I work with are better at that practitioner than I ever will be or ever was. Um, but like I think I have learned a lot and I'm very skillful in bringing people together and leading a group to come to an outcome, rather than being the best S&C or the best sports scientist. Like that's definitely not where I think my overall skill set is being the best in each room.
Mm.
But it's definitely around bringing that collaboration together and how we optimize our performance as a team.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I think people will listen to that and be like, either that's similar to me, or I'm very much like the sort of on the technical side in terms of delivering the sessions and coaching. And I think that'll split people, not in a bad way. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just think it just means that it gives people a little bit of maybe reflection on who you are as a person, and maybe it's a point of time in the career as well. Um,
Yeah, I think so. But like, one of the things that I've always expressed frustration at is if you're really good as a practitioner in a discipline, ultimately it feels like there's a ceiling to that. And you either then reach a point where you have to make a choice of do I become a manager or not? And then at the point you become a manager, you lose pretty much everything one you enjoyed and two you was good at, and you get thrusted into this different role and responsibility of now leading people that you're not necessarily good at, you don't necessarily enjoy, and that's a real challenging place for a good practitioner to be. Whereas like the more, and again, I think sports are starting to see it, the more you can create discipline specific routes of progression to allow people to still be really bloody good at what they do, but take more responsibility, take more leadership, take more ownership of being an S&C across a club, being still tailored to that discipline rather than having to go to being a head of performance or a head of department. I think that is where that creates that opportunity for really good practitioners to still be really good practitioners. Um, Without, yeah, essentially killing someone twice because you take them out of a job they were really good at, put them into a job that they might not really be good at because they wanted progression. um and that's really hard, and that for me is where clubs and organizations can try and get better at creating progression routes that aren't just promotions or leadership, because they, for me, they are completely different roles.
yeah.
And especially once you go outside of disciplines and you're managing multiple people, multiple disciplines, that becomes a lot harder and it's a lot different to leading a group of S&C coaches. But even that in itself, leading a group of S&C coaches versus being a really good S&C coach are two completely different roles. Which and I get people's frustration with it because you're like, I either have to go for something else or where's my ceiling progression going to stop?
Mm. You'd have worked with numerous coaches in this sort of situation, but if people have progressed and they're not looking for that leadership role, you also lose that quality of coach in that position as well, don't you? So if they're doing
Yeah,
such a good job and then you take them into those progressed positions, that's where you lose the practitioner.
yeah. But this is where I think like you're starting to see clubs think differently and be smart because they'll take one of the world's best S&C coaches out of an institute who just wants to be a coach, but
Mm.
I'll give them a progression in terms of potentially financially responsibility and allow them to still be a coach. Whereas if that person had stayed in that environment, their only option would have been to go to a head of or a lead, and
Yeah,
that might not have been what they wanted or thrive best in.
yeah. No, it's really interesting that. Again, it's come up a few times, and I think you can see it in practitioners, can't you? And it's interesting to see the difference. And I think you're right. I think there needs to be more routes developed for people to give people that vision and that progress without necessarily, well, essentially changing jobs and responsibilities quite drastically.
Yeah.
What's your views, Liam? Because obviously you've got background across different sports. We've talked about like a head of performance type role, um, but from different disciplines as well. So one that jumps out is Hannah Sheridan came on. She's in a similar sort of position, but from a nutrition background, but very much the type of personality you can expect in a leadership role. Do you think it has to be someone from S&C, sports science, or could we go nutrition? Could we go physio? Just as long as they have that I suppose the attributes, the physical attributes, the communication skills to fit.
Yeah, no, I think it goes back to what I was just saying because, and again, my personal opinion, because it's such a different role, it doesn't matter what background you come from because the role is no longer doing, it's managing people who do. And,
Hmm.
and and the skill is in can you manage people? Can you lead an environment? Can you lead an organization? Can you think strategically? Can you do all of that? So yeah, that can come from any discipline. I think where struggles come is it predominantly ends up being an S&C or a sports scientist in most environments. I think for one of two reasons: lack of resources. So it's the natural progression because you're not going to bring someone extra in, so it's more of a progression, and then proximity to coach.
Yeah.
Like because in most environments, the people who have the most interactions with player and coaches tend to probably be sports science, S&C, and or physios. So they're the three that end up ultimately probably getting enough of that world to step into that leadership role. But no, like ultimately for me, it's about mindset, skill set in managing people and organizations, and that can come from ultimately any discipline. And I think you said like people who you meet who are in those roles, you'll know why they're in their roles.
Yeah.
So it won't be because they're a really good sports scientist. It'll be because yeah, like you can tell they know how to lead a group, or you can tell they know how to create change in an environment, or how they can think strategically about a problem and develop that over time. Um, and that's where for me it's a different JD, it's a different skill set, it's a different thing altogether, and that's why you're starting to see more development opportunities in that, more masters in certain areas that are leadership focused, because it is almost as different to being a physio as to being an S&C.
I think it's interesting having so many conversations because you speak to people and some of the conversations I'll have, I'll be like, yeah, I want to be in a meeting that you're running. Just, you know what I mean? And there's other people that may be the opposite to that, but some people you have a 5 minute conversation, you're like, yeah, I can see it because just the way you communicate, the way you speak, I can imagine leading the team, you're going to get people, you're going to pick people up, you're going to drag people along and get them on board. And it's just, I don't know whether it's worked on for a lot of people, or whether it is kind of natural for some people as well to have that ability to do that.
Yeah, I definitely think there's an element both. I think there's some things that you have to have naturally, but there's a lot of things that you have to want to learn and understand on how people work, how groups work, those dynamics. Again, like a lot of my most recent reading and learning is business related, is psychology related, is interactions of people related, because that's how I get the most out of my team, which is ultimately what's important. They have all of the sport specific knowledge. I just need to garner that out of people. Um, so yeah, like it definitely is a skill, but there are some underlying probably personality traits and desires to want to be that leader.
Let's dive into that because the business world, I think, is it's interesting. If you're happy to go into it, I think this is an
Yeah,
interesting point because business, if we step away from football, from sport completely, there's so many lessons to learn across from business as well. I've literally got a bookshelf here full of books from probably numerous business owners. What's been some of the reflections and maybe some of the standout points when you've looked into that world that have crossed over to what you do now?
I think the biggest thing for me is systems and processes. And Dan Howes will laugh because he probably is the one who first introduced me to that. But like I've dived into it massively. Um, Organizations are run really well, business organizations. And if you can understand and learn and adapt ones that are really well and apply that into sporting context, I think you have this utopia of, again, like being really facetious, back to my analogy earlier, like organization businesses are the same as football in they still have a performance outcome and they still need to come together as a team to achieve it. It's just slightly different in nature, but essentially you're still dealing with people and people are what drive processes. So there's so much to learn there in how meetings are run, how days are organized, how you create collaborative learning environments. And when you really drill into some of the most successful business and companies, there's gold dust in there. One of the most recent books I've read is called The Social Brain, and is kind of written by the people who run the Oxford Business School's like intensive development course, and they talk so much around how you structure your environment gets the most out of people. They talk around again the groups of 5 and 10 and how you operate in different groups and what that means and how you have to structure meetings. Um, and I think you're seeing more and more of that of where people are taking things from business that make real sense in terms of how groups operate together and how environments should operate together, and then applying that to a sporting context.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, isn't it? You learn from a different environment and then just apply it to your context, like you just mentioned. I think
Yeah,
it's a real key point. As soon as you start looking to some of these organizations, it's massive. It was one thing that we ran. I'm not sure if it was the event you were at. I think it's possibly Oxford that we did, where we put up a load of different companies and we talked about some of the lessons that we can learn from them. So, likes of Apple, Coca-Cola, we threw out a few car brands and just the way they operate, obviously without knowing fully behind the scenes, but as we see from the outside.
yeah.
And in that task alone, it gets people thinking on actually, yeah, we can take the way that they do that and maybe tweak it to how we work. And there's a lot of lessons that cross over.
And I think what you normally end up figuring out is drilling to the underpinning reason whatever it was successful,
Mm,
and that's the bit of gold dust. So they might have done X, had an away day. Okay, an away day isn't the solution. It's what the away day was allowed to do, which created social interactions, which allowed you to share food together, which is one of the best ways to build relationships and therefore trust, right? It's figuring out that ultimate outcome and then going, okay, how can we achieve something like that?
yeah.
Um, so that for me is the magic. Is okay, they did this, which was really positive, but what did that actually cause on whatever level that was the positive benefit? And then yeah, there's so many opportunities and ideas once you get to that level.
You don't just need to go and replicate everything that Apple's doing, do you? That's the point.
No,
It's
but
but
you
it's
need to
it's
understand
learning
why what
exactly
Apple's doing is
exactly.
positive, and then how we can have our own version of that.
Yeah.
And we did it in the summer. So we actually tasked a lot of our kind of coaches across technical and sports science performance to go away and do some like study visits. And the request was that kind of ideally at least one of them was from a non-footballing environment for this exact reason. Um, and what one of the coaches presented a really good, probably my favorite of the lot of presentations we've had back from a business organization. And some of the key takeaways from that were like, yeah, we could really learn a thing or two from this around how we create the optimal environment for performance.
Yeah, class. I think it's a really good point for people. And I think with that as well, not necessarily just from the leadership positions, but I think business wise, if you're a practitioner and a strength conditioning coach, a sports scientist, I think the way that you communicate, you provide these opportunities for players even to maybe you to communicate with players. I still think there's a lot of transfer over.
I think so, and I've seen people do it, and I think there's a lot of opportunity in the reverse. Okay, what do I know and learn from high performance environments in sport that I
Yeah.
can take to an organization and deliver and come in and either help you understand how to strategically break a problem down in reverse engineer it and go, this is what we need to do. Like it's again, it's problem solving in its basic form. If you're going to apply a similar key thought processes and principles, then you kind of should hopefully end up in a good place.
And you see that a lot, don't you, where practitioners are taken into these environments, these businesses to speak to them because they want to pull from like Olympic teams or whoever it is. Like they want to learn from that environment, and it only should work the same way.
Yeah, 100%.
Let's go into that. The experience around Olympic cycles. We've just said about learning from slightly different environments. Talk to us about that because this is something that, again, we've had quite a few people on before that have worked in Olympic sport. Obviously, football is very, very different in terms of the schedule and what we're preparing for. But what have been some sort of standouts? Is there anything that crosses over, lessons that you've taken?
Yeah, I think at times there's a slight misconception on the frequency and the cadence of Olympic sports versus professional sport. So like if I just use badminton as an example, there was 30 to 40 professional tournaments a year that our players would either want to or need to participate in X amount. So the notion that it is just a 4 year cycle and one or two big performances is probably a bit outdated or more related to certain sports where probably more your time-based sports where there's clear qualifiers, there's clear these are the tournaments you have to perform well in. But a lot more of the points-based systems where you're continually competing, you have to maintain a ranking, maintain a scoring system. Similar to tennis, it's actually probably more aggressive in cadence than people realize. Um, However, with the utopian of it tending to always work in a 4 year cycle, you having that probably big spearhead event at the end of 4 years, that's where I think you learn a lot about thinking about things differently because while you have a short-term need, you have a long-term aim. And it's like, okay, we reverse engineer, what do we actually need to do in the next 6 months, 12 months to put us in the best opportunity or best position to have success here? It was one of the things that drew me to the role I'm in now, which is while the club is a professional football club, we have a season to go and win. We have games to go and win every Sunday. What was in the job description and the advert that went out was a 2030 aspiration as a club. And that for me was the draw because it was like, okay, we need to win short term, but we also
Yeah.
need to build something that's capable of going on a 4 year journey.
Mm.
And they are two things that are really difficult to do simultaneously, but really exciting when you can.
Mm.
Um, so that's the bit is like how do you reverse engineer that to achieve what's needed in the short term, but it be done in a way that allows you to build ongoing success. So again, like building a house, you have to have the best foundations, but you have to build the foundations in the right amount of time to be able to sell the house that you need to in the time frame you need to. It's like trying to navigate those two kind of paces, thinking fast and slow. Um, I think the level of detail in terms of review, reflection, planning is very different from ecosystems. And that's something, again, I think we can learn a lot more from around how the professional sport elevate that level of detail in planning block to block, review, reflections, learning from the last year, learning from the last block or the last cycle, and moving forward rather than kind of repeat. So I've learned a lot around hot debriefs, slow debriefs, post games debriefs, pre-mortems, post-mortems, those sort of language that I think is again starting to creep into the professional game, but isn't fully there yet. Um, so yeah, like that probably some of the big things that I think you learn and you see differently. Um, which I think if the more pro sport starts to do that, you'll see an even more exciting environment.
And you think with that the reason why we maybe don't do it in season is we just get caught up in this trap of game recover, and just not have that time to, not necessarily that time, but we don't create that time to go into a reflection piece.
Yeah, it's prioritization because there is always time. Like
Yeah.
we're busy, but we're never that busy. Um, and it's people until you see the importance of it, people don't see the importance of it. And that's the bit is once you really see the importance of pausing, reflecting, changing, doing, um, it almost becomes non-negotiable. Whereas I think we get so caught up, like you say, in that, okay, I've got a game on Saturday, I've got a game in Saturday, I've got a game on Saturday, that we don't go, okay, let's just take a minute. Because one, if you reflect on the last 6 weeks, there'll be patterns, there'll be clues, there'll be themes, and that can inform the future. And you can review and reflect over different periods, time frames, and you don't have to review and reflect in the same way. So again, one of the things I learned when I was at England netball is we would do a hot debrief after every kind of tournament we had. So it would tend to be a 1 or 2 week cycle, and we would just do a hot debrief, and it would be not to solve anything, not to point fingers, no clear outcome, but it would almost be the opportunity for everyone to just put that immediate thoughts in the moment directly after the final game on a piece of paper essentially. And then what we do is we collate that and we come back to it and go, okay, these were the hot thoughts. We'd then probably do a bit more of a cold debrief on it. And then that would give us a couple of action points for moving forward. Um, and you can really learn a lot quickly doing that. And it doesn't have to take a long period of time. Um, so again, like even now, like we try, and I think sometimes people do it organically, but can you formalize it, capture it, and kind of build it? So can you hot debrief after a session? What went well? What didn't? What about tomorrow? And build that. And that's just when you get kind of this learning cycle that, well, if you're reflecting on everything you do, you can kind of build processes moving forward and let it impact the program.
No, another great point. It's really interesting actually. I was watching Quarterback last night on Netflix, and one of the episodes is with one of the quarterback, um, Kirk Cousins, and he's speaking about using voice notes to his coaches, and he literally does it on the drive back from games. So you're catching that point where he can just dump all the information out on the voice note, then they can break it down after. And I suppose it's a kind of a similar thing in a way. Obviously player, but we're referencing coaches to get that information over quickly, isn't it? And then break it down.
Yeah, I used to do similar on my drives home from work. Like I'd have a 2 hour drive, and I just used to, for a period of it, just voice notes on my thoughts,
Yeah,
collate it. Like again, it's really easy now to get things to type that up into some note format for you, and then you've just got a recollection of your thoughts.
yeah.
And just the process, half the time of talking it through is the reflection that you need, and you don't actually even go back to it, but you've spent enough time reflecting in the moment that it's really powerful.
Class. Liam, this has been great to catch up. It's absolutely flown that. I really appreciate you coming back on, mate. And I think we've covered some really interesting stuff in this episode as well. So thank you very much for coming on. If people have got questions for you, they want to reach out, is there anywhere specifically to direct them?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place to grab me. Should be able to find me fairly easily, and I try to respond to most of my messages on there. So yeah, that's probably the best way.
Perfect. Liam, thanks a lot, mate. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, mate. Glad to be back.